Neutral zone, where grit meets growth. There's no clear path, we carve our own. Every shift, every unknown. Pull up a seat, it's time to start. Turn down the noise, hear the heart. Neutral zone, this is where grit meets growth. Oh, 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 this is where grit meets growth. Neutral zone.
Okay, welcome back to episode 4 of the Neutral Zone. And for my guest today, I have somebody who has come from the front lines of the military to now the blue lines of hockey, working with the equipment manager side. And so please welcome to the podcast, Matthew Militich.
Hey, everybody. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do here, we're going to start with the starting lineup, and I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself to everybody, give a little bit more detail about kind of your background and then how you got to where you are now. So I will turn that over to you.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here. When you dropped me that concept of what you were trying to do, I thought it was really outstanding. And, it's really great for people like myself that didn't start in the game at a young age. And so a little bit about myself, I was a military brat growing up, moving all around the world, settled in high school finally, went to a small college in South Carolina to play soccer, did that for 4 years, and then joined the military into the Army, you know, for the last 20 plus years, retired in 2022 after 21 years and, tried corporate America and just didn't like it.
Yeah.
I missed the team. I missed the camaraderie. I missed the things. And I had an opportunity fall into my lap where the Allen Americans were looking for some game day help. And I got a hold of the equipment guy here and told him, hey, I don't have a job right now, but I'm more than willing to come in and help. And so he kind of brought me on as an intern and did some things. And unfortunately for him, but fortunate for me, I guess, right place, right time, he was let go. And I kind of got thrust up into the position, which was kind of funny because I didn't know how to sharpen skates at the time. So that was kind of an adventure, and we can talk more about that as we go on. And
Yeah.
that was 3 years ago, and here I am in year 3 as the head now in Allen, and loving every minute of it.
I love that. It's a perfect story of, life can throw you curveballs and things, but you can kind of go along with the ride and see what you can learn from things. And I think when you have a positive attitude, opportunities are going to come your way. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's they say hockey's for everyone, but it truly is. I mean, it is a small,
mhm.
tight-knit community, and the amount of help that I got in year 1 from everybody, including fans and people like yourself, even though you were behind my bench cheering for the other team, it kind of how we met, but it just the help you got and the pats on the back and the push to move forward, is what it was really all about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I haven't really even talked about that part of it in the podcast yet. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think probably people that are listening 4 episodes in, they're like, wait a minute. If I know Sarah, I know that she, is in Tulsa and she goes to Oilers games. But, so far she's had some Oilers people, but also have had somebody that played in Kansas City. And now I've got you with Allen. And so I think, just for the audience that might not know that, I do sit behind the visitors bench at the games, but I think it's just my leadership background with kids and things. I don't look at, cheering on a team as like, yes, I am a fan, but it's not like do or die where, if you're not in my team's colors, then like you don't matter, you're not important. I think everybody loves the game and everybody's there for a reason. And you know, about 5 years ago, like losing my dad, I kind of was like, I need to bring some joy to my life and other people might need that too. We were coming off of COVID. And so I just decided to start doing some dad jokes at the games. And that
Yeah.
has brought connections that I would have never imagined. So just for anybody that's like, wait a minute, how does she have or know these different people or different things? It's just take what the game gives you and what life gives you. And like I said, I'm very thankful for hockey because it's brought a lot of connections and people that have stories that, I would have never met otherwise. So,
Yeah, and it, for people that haven't been to an Oilers game or, an ECHL game, it's the fans are awful close
mhm,
to the benches, and you never know what kind of environment you're going to walk into. There are some arenas where you kind of know this is what you're walking into, and
mhm,
you got to have your guard up. But it's fun to come to Tulsa and walk on the bench, and that's what you're always looking for. You're always looking for Sarah with the board. What joke has
mhm.
she got from you today? And so that makes it a little bit fun to walk out and look at it and be like, all right, I better have my brain turned on because they're not easy.
Yeah, right. I know. Hey, listen, it's more difficult every year to come up with more of them. I keep going through and trying to find more. But I think it is important for fans to note that, yes, you love your team and, you know, but just that respect that everybody's out there playing the same game they love. And, with hockey being a fluid sport, you could be sitting there, booing or rooting against somebody that literally the next night they could be in your team's colors. Like that's how it works sometimes. And so just having that mindset when you're coming to a game makes it a lot easier to enjoy, and I think a lot easier sometimes when maybe the game doesn't go your way because you realize you're there just enjoying the game, and your life isn't over if there's a loss. So I think it
Yeah,
makes it a lot
yeah,
easier.
absolutely. Yeah, the coast is definitely a lot different. You're exactly right. You could have someone in my colors, like we've seen in the past, that this weekend you're in Allen's in Tulsa, and then we're up in back down here, and there's somebody that's wearing our colors that was in Tulsa colors, or vice versa the week
Mhm.
before. So it
Yep.
just happens that way.
It is fluid and life is fluid as well. So we are going to start with our first period here, which is going to kind of focus on your military career and also kind of your pivot into hockey and what that looks like. So starting out, you mentioned military brat growing up and things and going to college. Was joining the military something that you always knew that you wanted to do? Is it something that you kind of figured out after college? Talk to me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you grow up in a military family and there are a lot of men and women that are still in uniform or have worn the uniform that grew up in military families, and it's what you've known, and you start to get certain values and traditions instilled in you, and you tend to kind of lean that way. But for me, I knew I was going to go into the military just being an athlete. I didn't have aspirations to build anything or own a business or anything like that. And I just liked what the military had to offer. And it was actually my senior year of high school. I was actually getting ready to sign either with the Marines to go Marine Recon, or I was going to try and sign on with the Army to go either Special Forces or something along that nature. Just being an athlete, the mindset kind of made sense. And it was really my mom who kind of grabbed me by the back of the collar and said, no, you're not doing that. You're going to college. You need to get your education. You need to figure it out. And I was like, okay. So that's when I kind of really started to pursue, started reaching out to schools about playing soccer because that's what I was doing. I was also playing travel soccer at the time. Growing up as a military brat, I grew up mostly in warm weathered states before hockey was really big. Most of the time was spent in Hawaii. So playing hockey was not really an option. I almost made the pivot to hockey in high school until, I thought I could skate. And then I kind of went out and watched a practice and I was like, yeah, no, I'm not even close to where I need to be to even break the lineup. I just be a pylon or a cone out there for those other guys. But so, when I signed on at the college that I signed out to play soccer, I lucked out. They had a Reserve Officer Training Corps program or ROTC program. And so I took that my first year and signed my contract with them before my second year of college. And so that kind of jumped my pathway into the military to go that route. And so the rest of college was kind of easy for me. I didn't have to worry about finding a job when I graduated or anything like that. I kind of knew what my path was, and I got to, as part of that, I got to see the world. As a young 22 to 26-year-old, I had already been in two different states and I had already been overseas once, as part of the initial push to Baghdad in 2003. So talk about, 22, 20, it was about 23, yeah, 23, 24, and here you are, you're leading 34 guys and you're responsible for their life and, bullets are flying and, but the people say, oh, that must have been scary. No, not really. It was what you trained to do. There are a lot of
Right.
people that came before me, like my dad and stuff like that, that they trained for that kind of stuff their entire military career and never got an opportunity to put that training into action. So things kind of really hit heavy for me the second time I got sent to Iraq. I had my firstborn while I was there. Luckily, I made it
Hmm.
home in time for that. And then, that kind of just changed the trajectory of my military career from there. Uh, Having the opportunities to go different places again, see different things, you know, build more teams. I spent some time out at the National Training Center helping units build their teams, things like that. Settled down in Texas. After that, where my second was born. Texas is now my home. And so, throughout that military career, you get pushed around and just like anything in life, things don't go your way in the military as much as you think they would, and you end up doing things that you never thought you'd be able to do. Hence, I ended up at what we call a combat support agency, and I was writing logistics plans for contractors to be able to help our troops out forward on the ground get stuff. And then from there, I ended up at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency where I actually had teams and we were looking at imagery. So like some of the imagery that you see the Pentagon release or the State Department or things like that on TV, on Fox or CNN or whatever your choice is for your news outlet, it was my teams that were reading that before it was released. So, the coolest part was I upset about being behind the desk? Yes, absolutely I was. But the fact that I got to brief the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense almost on a weekly basis on some things was, probably the highlight, other than going to war, was probably the highlight of where I was. But those interactions, both at a young age and then further on in my military career, is really what helped me understand that relationships mattered. Building teams and motivation and having a team work mentality and the camaraderie is really what drove me to get into the sports world. Everybody wants to work in sports, but what they don't understand is that you have to draw the line somewhere between being a fan that enjoys going to the games and watching the games and being able to separate yourself to be able to
Hmm.
do the work.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I think too, I think it's just a testament that, like, you know, whatever hand you have in life, if there's something that you want to do, like, there's a way to do it. You have to just have the willpower and the, m- mindset to learn. That's something that I've, learned as a teacher. People are like, how do you keep doing it 20 years in? And my mindset is I never get stagnant, right? I'm always learning something new. There's always something new to try, a new pathway to learn, something new to, teach myself. And I think in life, sometimes people can get a little bit down of like, oh, well, this is all I'm going to be, or this is all I'm going to do, or this is what life gave me. So I guess I have to do it. And it's just a mindset that you set yourself to whatever position that, the Lord has placed you in, to figure out what you can do within that to bring what you can to the table. And it's all about how you look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've got the time and the energy to follow your dream and go after it, then you have to put that foot forward, and there's sacrifices that come with that. It's not all through a rose-colored lens because that's what the movie told you happened, or that's what the
Hmm.
book that you're currently reading, how everyone has a happy ending. I mean, it's not always that way. There's a lot of failures that come before it. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of changes and pivots and things that you have to do in order to get to where you go and setbacks,
Hmm.
but those are just life lessons to help you put that in your memory bank and go, okay, well, let's not do that again. and eventually someone's going to take a chance. Someone's going to give you an opportunity, and what you make of that opportunity is how you move forward to find that dream.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned the rose colored glasses side of things because that ultimately is one of the main reasons that I decided to kind of do this podcast the way that I am. Because I think with social media the way it is and the NHL becoming more popular and just sports in general. I think a lot of fans get this false idea of, the ECHL is just like the NHL or the AHL. And, these athletes, like, they get as much things as you might have as an NHL player. And, life is easy and the glitz and glam of like that athletic life. And, luckily, whatever you want to call it, like for me, I've been able to kind of see behind that lens of like it's not all the glitz and glam, and I think it's just because I listen and I watch, and the teacher side of things I can understand that, but I don't think the casual sports fan understands the sacrifices that go into being an athlete, especially in the minor leagues, and really the passion that you have to keep going, um, because not everybody's going to get that chance at the big leagues. And so you really have to love what you're doing in order to stick it out for as long as some of these minor league athletes do. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about maybe that behind the scenes of the glitz and glam that, you know, people have to deal with.
Sure, I'm behind the scenes every day.
There you go.
It, yeah, it's a lot different, and to kind of put it into perspective for some of your listeners that are out there that don't really understand where the ECHL kind of falls. If you're familiar with baseball, baseball is a tiered system. You've got the major leagues, you've got your triple A, which is one step below, you've got your double A, which is two steps below, and then your single A, that's way down there. And, the way how it works is you have the NHL and AHL. So the NHL is your top tier. I don't want to say it's unlimited budget, but they have a lot more money and cash flow because of the TV contracts, because of the sponsorships they're able to sign, because of their national availability. And then they pretty much own their American League affiliates. And in baseball, they own the major league all the way down to single A. And hockey is completely different. They own
Mhm.
the major league and the triple A affiliate, the American League, and then the ECHL, and then you have the Southern Professional Hockey League and the Federal Prospects League, and those are all independent owned. Some of them are owned by different groups, but there is what we call an affiliation with the NHL, but there's no money being pumped down from the NHL or the AHL into these East Coast Hockey League clubs. And a lot of these East Coast teams are actually absorbing some money that they're having to pay out to have these affiliates to get these players down to their level. And when you talk about what the players have to go through, not only do they have to make sure that their training regimen and their eating habits and things like that put them at the best ability for them to perform night in and night out, but they're also trying to make it to the next level. And the stuff that has to go on behind the scenes and the pay is very comparably different. There's probably, these players they sign a contract, a year contract, but really in the grand scheme of things, if you look at it, it's a week to week contract.
Mhm.
Like we talked about earlier in the podcast, one week they could be playing for Allen, the next week they could be in Tulsa, or they could get cut and they're not picked up again and they're having to move down a tier, so to speak. But the sponsorships are different. The money that influxes is different. Most teams do not own their own buildings, so they're paying rent. And with the collective bargaining agreement that the players got signed earlier this year, their housing has to be paid for, their electric gets paid for, their water gets paid for, utilities, all that stuff is paid for, where in the American League and the National League, that doesn't happen. Those guys are responsible for their own housing and the things that come with that. So I understand when people say, hey, these guys don't make a lot of money. You're right, they don't. Some make maybe 20 grand. Some your high end players may make 30, but
Mhm.
throughout the year, the bills that they have to pay are choices of their own consequences
Mhm.
because their housing is paid for, stuff like that. When they go on the road, they get a per diem. It's not very much, I'm not going to lie. It's not great, especially for some of the cities that you have to travel to when you have to go to like Lake Tahoe Casino Resort Ski Town, where, breakfast is going to cost you $30 and you get $60 for the day. So the glitz and glam isn't always there. The sponsorships teams are trying hard to sell their sponsorships, but the cost of everything, because the guys do get their helmet, their gloves, their pants, their sticks, that's all paid for by the team. Their skates is paid for by the team, but anything else, they're coming out of pocket for. I mean, it's a business model where
Hmm.
most owners are either writing it off for tax purposes, or they're, waiting to sell to make a profit. But they all love the game. We're all in it for the same thing because we love the game. And some of these players know that they're not going to make it to the next level, so they're trying to ride this out as long as they can before they kind of have to go get a real job. And some of them have real jobs on the side because they are
Hmm.
starting their own business or training to be a firefighter, whatever it may be. But it's really, how the different teams operate the different models to get the best that they can. Some have booster clubs with fans that do cook them food or have food for them after the game. At the ECHL, they truly understand that without the fans, there isn't a team. Where at the next couple levels above us, like those contracts that we talked about, the TV revenue sharing money, those kind of things, those kind of feed a lot of what they're able to do, where that's not here in the coast. So from the outside looking in, before I took this job, and I would go to a few Allen American games, like, man, this has got to be great, da da da. And then kind of seeing how things operate behind the scenes, you get an appreciation for what these guys have to go through, to an extent, but you also understand that this is what they signed a contract
Hmm.
to do, and that's what comes with it.
Absolutely. Now, do you think the NHL would ever go to the model that the Major League Baseball teams have, or why do you think there's that discrepancy between kind of how those things are handled, in your
I
opinion?
haven't been in, yeah, I mean, I haven't really been in the game long enough to get a good understanding of how that all works. It would be awesome if they did. I think you would have a better, I mean, don't get me wrong, the product on the ice at the East Coast level is amazing. You
Hmm.
still get NHL contracted guys that come down here to try and build their confidence to do things. You see it with goalies all the time. You see it with some of the players. I just don't know from a feasibility perspective what the modeling would look like. And I don't think there's an appetite at the National Hockey League level, to make that adjustment at that move. I'm sure it's been discussed. I'm sure there's been conversations about it, but I don't think the appetite is there, for those guys to move on down and take on another, you know, minor league, so to speak, because they already own the American League. So to,
Right.
move that to that locale, um, I just don't see the appetite there.
Right. Well, I also wonder too if it has to do with the amount of young talent that they have, because I know with the baseball, you got a ton of draft picks. Some of these kids coming from high school, even that you have to have a lower league to place all of those kids in. And I think with a lot of younger kids in hockey, maybe going overseas first or staying the junior route, maybe there's just not as much of a need for play. I guess is the right way to say
Yeah,
that.
no, I think that's a great angle to look at it. I mean, you have the WHL, the OHL, the CHL, you have the
Mm.
USHL, all these junior programs. When you watch the NHL draft, those kids are getting drafted out of. So from that junior's perspective, that is kind of their pathway
Mhm.
to find the young talent. And then, when they sign those guys necessarily don't have to go right into the big club. They can play there for a couple years before they've got to move up. I know some of that stuff is, they're talking about making changes to some of that stuff, but
Yeah.
and then when they do come in and go to camp, most of those kids are at a level where they can go right in and play in the American League. And
Mhm.
you see it because you can go on their hockey, database or elite prospects, and you can look and see who has a contract. And
Yeah.
sometimes, unfortunately for them, they just get stuck down here in the East Coast League and they don't ever get an opportunity to move up.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, I think I could see it working
Mhm.
with the National League coming down and kind of as a governing body to help promote. I
Mhm.
don't think that'll come to fruition.
Yeah. Yeah. So, kind of you talked about going into Allen starting it as an intern, and I kind of wondered like mentality wise, you had been doing something else for all of your life, right? 20 plus years in the military. So you kind of had to start over again as like the newbie coming in. And I just know a lot of people wouldn't be able to handle that. I think sometimes egos get in the way of like, well, I've lived this life this long. I know what I'm doing. I don't need to come in and like learn from somebody else. Like, what do you think helped you kind of approach that mentality of like, I'm starting out as an intern. This is going to look a little bit different than, whereas before I had a lot of experience in things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously being older when I got this job, right? I wasn't 22, 23 years old out of high school, or I wasn't like a lot of these guys when you ask them for advice that have been in the game for 30 plus years, where they started out as a stick boy or a game day helper folding towels, at the age of 15, 16, and they just kept doing it. And then finally they got their foot in the door and they were able to do equipment repairs. For me, what I really dwelled upon was uh, I got some good advice as a young Army officer where a lot of times when people get put into positions, they want to kind of rule with an iron fist. It's my way or the highway. We're doing it this way. But what you fail to realize is that the people that are there have the experience and know. And so, what I always did, and changing jobs in the military, changing jobs every 2 to 3 years. So you're always the newbie, right?
Hmm.
You're just put into positions of leadership as the person in charge when you come in. So what I always did is I always did like depending on how much time you had, a 60-day to 90-day evaluation of where you're going into, how are things operating, how can you make it better without, you know, basically flipping the apple cart. And I also it was humble. It was humble pie for me, right? I've had this great career. I had a corporate job where I was making six figures and then just now I had nothing. I had my military retirement and disability to fall back on. So, but it was also something cool for me because it was a new challenge. It
Hmm.
was something different, but it wasn't that different because there was a team, there was the camaraderie, there was the teamwork, we all are pushing in the same direction to accomplish the same goal. We all just had different jobs and different ways to get there. So for me, it was really what could I learn in that short amount of time and how could I help the organization without stepping on anybody's toes is really kind of how I approached it, which was definitely not new to me, but it was also, I didn't have everyone in the organization that had a similar mindset as I did from being from the military. So it was definitely I don't want to say walking on eggshells, but it was kind of tiptoeing around a little bit, but making sure that the things that I had responsibilities for on those days was getting done while taking note of there were ways to improve things that were going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, and I think if people would enter that with that mindset with a lot of situations, I think things would be a lot easier sometimes for people. And I think the earlier you can learn that, the better. And think with teaching younger kids, that's one of the things that we talk about is kind of being a chameleon where you're at and learning about things around you and still figuring out how you can bring what you do best to the table while also assimilating where you need to in the places that you're at. So another question I had for you. So what was kind of your first like welcome to the pros moment when you kind of took over that equipment manager position of like what was the first major maybe situation that came up in game that like you had to fix this right now or things were not going to go well if you can remember.
I remember very, very vividly two moments. So like we talked about, unfortunately, but fortunate for me being in the right place, the right time where I was thrust into position. I think it was either my first game or second game actually on the bench as the guy in charge. And I had a rookie goalie in net, and man, it was like I think it was like maybe 4 or 7 minutes into the first or second period, and he snapped a lace on his pad that connected to his skate. And I immediately was like, okay, what am I doing? Like he came to the bench. I thought he may have had like a steel problem, and he was like, no, my strap broke, and it broke so close to the toe of the pad and then it actually had ripped part of the leather pad off, and there's no way I had enough time to sew the leather pad back into place and have him relace it for him. So I literally just I had a little tool in my bench bag, and I had to poke a hole through his pad and put the skate lace, and I had to lace up. Luckily, my son played goalie a couple times, so I kind of remembered how to lace it up to get him through the period. And it was like, the coaches are leaning over the bench staring at me. All the players are staring at me. I got the ref comes over and kneels down next to me like, hey, how much longer is this going to take? And I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking, I haven't been doing this like kneeling on ice trying to fix this thing for about a minute. And here I got everybody pushing me like, hey, if you don't fix this, he's going to have to come out of the game. And I'm like, oh my God, here we go. But I got it done. And the funny part was like, after I lace it, he didn't relace it for like the next 4 games. So
Superstition. You gotta.
yeah, I mean, he got a win that night, thank God.
Uh-huh.
But the second one was really it was like, I think it was actually the following weekend, one of my veterans, and so veterans in the East Coast are guys that have played, I think it's like 260 games, I think it is, or been in the league 4+ years or something like that. And he blew out the tuck, the runner on his skate. And so I had to jump off the bench, run back into the office. I put one of my interns, or no, I didn't have anybody on the bench at the time. The trainer was kind of covering for me, and I ran back here to the locker room, and I'm like hadn't really learned how to rivet all the way yet, and I couldn't get them, and they were falling, and I was just like, I'm watching the game clock just times ticking, 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 and so I ran his old skates back out to him that or his new skates out to him. They hadn't even broken in. Put the steel. I was like, here, just put these on. I'll try and fix it in between the period. And I could not get it. Like I couldn't get it done. And yeah, you got a lot to learn, bud. Like this is one of those things that should be relatively quick, easy, old tuck off, new tuck on. You're done in under 5 minutes, and it's back to the ice. And so that was a welcome to the pros moment. That didn't end up going well in my favor. And so I, the military background, I mean, I spent the next 4 or 5 days actually taking apart my own skates and learning and teaching myself how to rivet faster and things like that. So
Yeah. I think, you know, life is pretty quick to humble you in any spot of like just when you think like you know everything you need to know and there's not going to be anything that surprises you, here it comes. It's just you always need to be learning, I think is a lesson in life. And it's funny that you mentioned that tool that you had because one of the things I always crack up with on like sitting behind the bench is I just feel like you guys are kind of like Mary Poppins and like when she brings that big bag and she's just pulling like everything out of it. Like the things that just you have, you see different trainers have different things and it's just like, where did that even come from? Why do you need that? And you would not even begin to imagine the amount of things you guys have to bring with you. It's kind of hilarious at sometimes.
yeah, it definitely is. But those bags can get pretty heavy, but you never know what situation you're going to run into. And it's one of those things where it's like, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Exactly. So you kind of mentioned you were a college athlete yourself and playing soccer, which I think actually I played soccer growing up. So I think that's one of the reasons why I took to hockey so quick because in my mind, it's literally like soccer on ice, but you also, you can hit a little bit more than you can in soccer. But I think the rules translate a lot over, so it was a lot easier for me to watch the game because I knew already with soccer how that went. But how do you think having that athletic background like helps you as a equipment manager anticipate like what the guys might need before they even ask you for it? Like how do you think
Um,
that's kind of helped you?
yeah, I mean that. Yeah, I mean, being an athlete, you learn that your equipment is what helps you get the job done, and so you have to pay attention to your equipment to make sure it's going to operate properly, which is also part of my job. But you just it's the mentality that really that I brought in where it was you have to make sure that you're taking care of the guys. So there, when we talked about the behind the scenes glitz and glamour, I mean, it's every day the guys come off the ice or whatever it is, and I'm checking their equipment. Whether sometimes they don't even know that they need things done, and it's getting done. You're checking that equipment, and it's also more of a military thing where it's like you have to like do maintenance on your vehicle in order to make sure it's going to operate properly. So it's kind of the same thing there, where I'd rather find the problem now than end up with a problem like I've had in the past in a game because I didn't look at things properly beforehand. So really, it's more, in my mind, it's more preventative and having the team set and the players set for the game to be able to skate at their optimal capacity without having to worry about an equipment failure.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the perfect segue into this final question I have for this period, which is can you talk a little bit about a couple of the responsibilities you have like on the ice during the game? And then also some of the things that you're responsible for like during the week when there isn't a game, things that people might not see or might not even realize like has to be taken care of in order for a team to be ready to go for game day.
Sure. I mean, in game is kind of, I don't want to say it's standing there with twiddling your thumbs. It's not from an in game perspective. For me, it's, you got to wipe a visor because they got snowed or it got scratched. And so you're trying to work on that to get it out. You got to tighten their visor because they took a big hit and it got pushed up against their face. So you're dealing with unscrewing the visor a little bit, putting it where it needs to be, putting it back together. Guys in this league like to fight, so their chin straps get pulled and broken. So you got to replace a chin strap, or the guy is, lost an edge on his steel, so you've got to do a steel change. Guy breaks a stick, you're getting him a new stick. You know, doing a stick exchange. I mean, those are some of the small, and you get some small equipment repairs here and there, like I talked about with the goalie, but nothing too major during a game that you might do a quick fix, like somebody might tear a hole in their pants or might blow out a side of their pant and you're just putting a couple zip ties in it on the bench just to get them through the period until you can get back and do whatever needs to be done behind the scenes. A lot of the stuff that goes on leading up from a week perspective of what needs to happen to get the guys ready or to get ready for a game. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. It can be anything from you're fixing jerseys. And what I mean by that is you might be putting new name bars and having to sew them down on a jersey. You might be having to patch holes in a jersey and sew those down. You could be replacing rivets that help hold the runner and the steel and the runner and the skate together. You could be gluing things back together because somebody's torn something on their shoulder pads, or you're putting a patch on a glove because they've torn a hole in it. You're obviously always responsible for the locker room and how it looks. So you're always cleaning. You're always making sure the gear is all the way it's supposed to look. Laundry is always a big one, right? These guys don't do their own laundry when they're at the rink, so you get to deal with all the towels and their jerseys and socks and their clothes that they wear that's got to get washed and hung back in their lockers, and just doing some of the small things as well as the things that make things go. As you can see behind me, I've got the pants and I've got bags and I got sticks over here, and it's also the ordering and the paperwork that goes with all that, like making sure that you're checking the inventories to make sure that you don't need to order somebody sticks because they're running low, or is it time to order new skates for somebody. You know, it, where you at on your inventory paperwork, then you're dealing with the financial aspects of ordering with your vendors and paying bills and there's just a lot of things that go into it, and you got to have a really good time management perspective. I've been fortunate enough with this organization. I learned a lot the first year because I didn't have any help. But the last 2 years, I've been able to go out and find college age kids that are aspiring to be equipment managers, and I've
Mhm.
brought them in as interns, the unpaid. I pay them on game days with the tips that we get from the visiting team for doing their laundry and the things like that. But teaching them some things that I can teach them to help them move on in their careers, equipment managers, frees up my time to deal with a lot of the paperwork and the inventories and major repairs that they may not be able to do. But the people that I've had here with me the last couple of years have made my life so much easier. And I'm hoping that, they've applied for a couple of positions out there. I'm hoping that they get picked up because they're definitely ready to move on and start their own path.
Absolutely. And I think that's something, good to be able to find fulfillment in as well. Kind of leading in to this second period here, which is more like behind the scenes and life off the ice and things. I'm sure that, as a job that maybe doesn't get the thank yous or the recognition, maybe like, you said maybe a lot less in front of people and a lot more work behind the scenes. It's important to find fulfillment in a job that maybe is kind of invisible. And so that was kind of my question for you is what kinds of things bring you fulfillment in doing that job? And it sounds like being able to pass that on to other people is maybe one of those things. But are there some things that maybe looking back at the end of each day that you're like, this is what brings me joy in doing what I do?
Most days it's left leaving the rink in frustration and anger, just because of you're dealing with 30 something different personalities in a
Hmm.
room. You may have done something that you didn't know that you caused a second or third order effect. So you're getting yelled at by a coach or management or whatever. But no, really the fulfillment for me, and this is going to sound kind of cheesy and awkward, but it's really why I come to work every day and gives me the fulfillment is look, I'm not a spring chicken. Like we talked about, I'm not 22, 23, 24 in my early 30s. I've been around the block, so I really take pride in more of, because lack of a better term, dad in the locker room where guys can come and just talk to me about life issues, whether that's a girl problem or, hey, there's something wrong with my car. Can you help me look at it? Or do you know somewhere I can take it? Helping them understand, like, because a lot of these players are from Canada or from outside the United States, and they don't understand how the US banking system works or how to get certain things done and helping them that way. So for me, it's more kind of that mentoring, giving that fatherly advice side of it that kind of keeps me coming back every day, whether that's with my equipment help, my helpers, or my interns. I call them my assistants. They're not really my helpers. I call them assistants because that's what they are. Giving them advice or the players, just general life, and then other times it's the fulfillment of you get the repair done that you didn't think you could get done and it turned out great and the player loves it and you're like, oh my God, they're going to absolutely hate this. This is not going to work. But, you know, so it's those small wins, but for me, really, it's the mentoring and the helping those guys from a life aspect because obviously they're away from home. Yes, they can pick up the phone and call their parents, but some of them might not have good relationships with their parents. So, for me, that's really what gets me going and keeps me coming to the rink every day.
Well, and you mentioned, that might be cheesy, but I'm like, honestly, as somebody that's kind of in the same position, I think as you get older, the role that you see in your job changes. And I think if it doesn't change, that's when you get burnout easily. You kind of have to change with age and seasons of life. And I think for me as a teacher too, I'm not the young teacher that's going to do all the TikToks and know all of the lingo. My middle school kids all the time are saying phrases to me that I have no clue what they're talking about and I don't really want to, I'll leave that to the younger teachers, but being able to, be there for kids when they're struggling with things that they've gone through in life that maybe I've gone through and can, have been on now I'm through the other side of it, and I can, give them advice of like it's not going to be the end of the world. Like you can make it through. This is what you learn from it. I think is another reason why I'm able to stay doing what I'm doing. So I can identify with you on that side of things, and if we don't kind of change with the seasons, I think we can get burnout really easily on things. So I do agree with you on that. So the last question that I have for this section is, so when your arena doors are locked and things and you're able to kind of go home, what are some things that help you kind of shut your brain off and just unwind from the grind of work in general?
Besides a stiff drink, really, it's like I'm a workaholic, and so I've got two teenage kids, so like the drive home for me, because I don't live close to the arena. I mean, I live from a distance wise, it's not bad, but so that 20-minute to 25-minute drive with no traffic is really my time to decompress and let things go there. But it's really catching up with the girlfriend or
Mhm.
my kids, find out how their day was, how can I help them. But sometimes it's just as simple as don't talk to me. I'm sitting on the couch and I'm just watching TV, which doesn't happen very often. With all the things like I talked about that have to go on, sometimes you're not getting home till after 7 o'clock at night. Game days is a little different. You're not out till 2 a.m. and then you're back at the arena by 7 the next morning because we're skating at 10 or whatever it may be. But s- lack of sleep is there. But, it just, you got to find different things that help you decompress and just unwind, and I am not a poster boy for that. I definitely hold a lot of that inside and just kind of suppress it. And that's kind of the military thing in me,
Mhm.
that I've never really gotten over. So I can be a little angry sometimes when I come back into the office, but I try not to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's hard to turn your brain off, in a lot of jobs and a lot of places and things, and not take your work with you. So I think that's things that everybody kind of deals with. So the final period here, we're going to talk about character and just like grit and growth mindset, which I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on some stuff because I think with military background and stuff, you're going to have a lot to share with on this. So you mentioned it a little bit dealing with 30 plus guys. So every person is their own person, right? Everybody's individually, everybody's different. And so, how do you use like your military background and also just your leadership skills to manage all of those different personalities, whether that be like quirks or game day superstitions or just personalities in general? How do you handle that?
Uh, really, it's year one was a little tough because I was trying to make sure everybody was happy, everybody was taken care of. I mean, I still do that to an extent. And what I found out talking with these guys as hockey players, is they just want your honesty. They want you to
Hmm.
be honest. They don't want you to lie to them. They don't want you to, make something up to make them feel better. And so, sometimes it's the hard truth and it may upset somebody, but at the end of the day, you were honest. The biggest piece in dealing with 30 different personalities is you've got to figure out what makes everybody tick, because not some guys are just even keel and they're just go with the flow, and those are the easiest guys to handle because you just get it taken care of and you move on to the next task. Other guys, they're very particular, in how they want it done. So I actually bring them into my space, into my office if they want something done. I'm like, okay, this is how I'm looking at doing it. Will this work for you? I try and get their buy-in. I try and get them to kind of have a little bit of ownership in what they're asking me to do if the time allots for that to happen. But it's really like, also for me, it's also going to those guys that have been in the league for a while, the veterans on your team, your captains, your assistant captains, and like if there's an issue, like you take it up with them first. Like
Hmm.
you let them try and handle that personality, because those guys spend more time together doing things than the couple hours or few hours that I see them on a daily basis here at the rink or on game days. So I kind of try and utilize that team leadership with the culture that they're trying to build to help nip some of those personalities in the butt. And really that's kind of where it comes from. And you're going to take your lumps. You
Hmm.
are. It doesn't matter how hard you tried or what you've done to make them happy. Like they're just, so sometimes they're just not going to be happy, and you have to learn to accept that and understand that the backlash that you get or what they say is not personal. And you just, you let it ride, and then maybe you pull them off to the side the next day and say, hey, I didn't really appreciate how this went down, but want you to understand that, like, I'm trying to do everything I can to get you to where you need to be. And a lot of times they'll apologize and be like, yeah, sorry, I was having a bad day. The girlfriend and I had a fight. You kind of got the brunt of it, whatever it may be. But there's no right way to handle 30. And I know you know this from being a teacher. Like it just, there's no right way, and you can't do things the same with every personality. It doesn't work.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
once you realize that one blanket doesn't fit all, or one shirt doesn't fit all, you know,
Hmm.
you'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think over the years, the thing that I've learned most is there's not going to be a solution to everything. You're not going to have the answer to everything. So most of the time, the best thing you can do is just listen. Like, don't
Yeah.
try to figure it out. Don't try to find a solution. Sometimes there's just not going to be one. So, and sometimes people, don't even know what they need, right? So if they don't know what they need, you can't come up with what you need to do. And so I've just learned sometimes sit back and just listen, and life will figure itself out.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely it will. But again,
yeah.
communicating though, over communicating I think is the key there.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
that's
Yep.
that's really how you're going to figure it out.
Yep. Exactly. Uh, Being in the military and now with equipment managing, and you mentioned both things, you're dealing with teams and just personalities and your teammates. So you have seen what grit is like for a player on the ice. You've also seen and experienced what grit is as a member of the military. So, in your own words, like what does that word grit mean to you, and how do you apply it to your life?
Uh, yeah, I mean, to me, you're really talking about mental determination. It's not the physical aspect of it, it's the mental piece. From a player perspective, you can see it. A guy is hurt or injured. It's the mental determination and how their mental status is of how that situation is going to turn out. The military beats you down from a mental perspective, and how you think about things and approach situations is really how I've taken that on into life and into the current position where I am. You really don't realize, if you come in with negative thoughts, if you come in a bad mental state, and I don't mean like people going crazy. I'm just saying, like, your thoughts are not on the positive side, and there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. We all have those days. But the quicker you can change that mental attitude, the better determination you're going to have to get things done, and the easier it's going to be. It's not going to be easy, but it will make that path less resistant. So grit is also toughness, but that toughness, in my opinion, always comes from where you at from a mental fortitude and what is your current mental state. And you just go look at these exceptional athletes, you look at these top tier military operators. Yes, they're in great shape. Yes, they've got a physique that we all want to get after. But really, what do they all have in common? They all have a mental toughness to them that's allowed them to achieve the results that they've gotten to. And I think you see that in a lot of players in the East Coast Hockey League, that their mental toughness and their mental state is really what separates your top tier players from those guys that are trying to crack the lineup, those guys that are trying to move to the next level. And you can say, oh, that guy is tough. Oh, that guy does this. Yeah. But where's his mental fortitude? Where is he at? And that's where that when you hear guys say, oh, that guy's got great grit and determination. And in my head, I go, yeah, that's because he's mentally tough. He
Hmm.
has the mental aptitude and ability to push through the things that are hard to get to the results that he wants. And that's really what you see when you look at what's going on right now in the NHL with Vegas over Colorado. People can talk about the injuries to the Avalanche, but look at how John Tortorella changed the mental state of the Vegas Golden Knights.
Hmm.
That that to me is what speaks volumes right there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and even in the realm of, being in Oklahoma over here with the Oklahoma City Thunder organization with focus on, you got these new guys coming in and, you know, how do you get these players that are from other teams and it just seems like all of a sudden they come here and, their outlook changes. And I think it's just a culture of mental fortitude and what's your focus. And I think people don't understand how big of an impact culture of an organization has on performance of a team. You can have the best athletes in the world, but mentally and culturally, if your team is in shambles, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, it may
So,
be good for a little bit, but eventually it's going to fall apart.
mhm, absolutely. So my last question here for this period 3. So with my students in my leadership class, we read The Energy Bus by John Gordon every year.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but basically it's kind of a fictional story to get a leadership point across. So it's all about the 10 rules to kind of fuel your life. And it relates to everything back to like fueling a bus and different things and focuses a lot about positive energy. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you pick a number between 1 and 10, and that's going to equate to like one of those 10 rules. And I'm going to tell you what that rule is. And I want you to kind of talk to me what you think about it and how you would apply it to your life.
All
So,
right,
what number would
I'm going with my lucky number 7.
lucky number 7? Let's see. Okay. All right. So, rule number 7 is enthusiasm attracts more passengers and energizes them. So, kind of the point is like when you love what you do, people are going to naturally want to follow you and work with you. So, what do you think about that? And how can you kind of see that in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not enthusiastic or exuding enthusiasm about something that you're doing or something that you believe in, why is anybody else going to come along for the journey? Why would
Mhm.
anybody else want to jump on that train? And if you're not, especially you could tie it back into life, like if you're not have any enthusiasm for what you're doing or a task that you're doing or things like that, it just makes it that much more difficult.
Mhm.
And from a leadership perspective, and you see it all the time, finding different ways to motivate people, especially in the military, to get them to do a crappy task, like, hey, sorry guys, we got to go pick up trash today. Like,
Right.
but if you're not finding a way to make it fun or you have some enthusiasm about it, then it's just going to make it that more miserable. And every day when I come into the office, like I've got to figure out a way to find my enthusiasm or to find my happy place basically to get myself through the day. Because if I come in and I'm dragging behind and my assistants come in and they see it and then okay, well then they get down and then it just makes the day that much longer. And so, you know, you gotta find joy, and you gotta find
Hmm.
ways to enhance your enthusiastic ideas that makes people want to follow you, or wants to make people get behind you and support you
Absolutely.
in the decisions that you're trying to make or what you're trying to achieve. And that can be the same with from a leadership perspective of you take the opposite of enthusiasm and you say negativity. If your life is filled with negativity, whether that's a circle of people you run with, or the work environment that you're in, or something that you're doing, you've got to find a way to get out of that negativity and that cycle and find the people that are going to be around it. And I think that goes back to you're just a mirror of the people that you surround yourself with. So
Hmm.
people need to look at that and go, where am I at? And it's a difficult task. And that's why they say not everybody is a friend for life.
Hmm.
People are there in your life that help you get to achieve certain goals, but at some point you are going in a direction that they're no longer going to support or help you get to. So how do you move on from those people in your life? And that's one of the most difficult things to do. But enthusiasm, without that in your life, you're not going to be a leader, and you're not going to be able to find joy and happiness in the things that you want to do.
Absolutely. I couldn't have put it better myself. I love that. So the overtime period here, this is a mic drop moment where I kind of
Yeah.
step away and you get to just choose whatever you want to talk about. It could be a passion that you have, it could be just some core wisdom you want to share, a memory you want to talk about, anything you want to talk about. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Sarah, for having me on and giving me the opportunity to tell my story and have some good conversations. And I hope that for the listeners out there, if they've taken something away from this that they can put into their life. I have some passions and things, but you know, the biggest thing I want to share with people is chase your dreams. I'm 47 years old. That I have always wanted to work in sports since I was a young kid, and I finally took a leap of faith on myself and just kind of did it and stuck with it. Doesn't matter where you're at in life, if you have a dream, chase it, but have a plan to find that to how to achieve that dream. Otherwise, you'll be chasing it forever. Get to meet as many people as you can that are working in your dream, that are working for your dream, that can help open doors or just make contacts and make new friends. Everyone has a dream. Some people just haven't realized what that dream is yet. And I would challenge anybody that is unsure what their dream is to sit back and think about what brings you joy. But it's also a balance, because we all have to adult at some point. That chasing that dream, will it still continue allow you to be a positive impact in people's lives? And I would say do what makes you happy, because if you're not happy, are you working to live or are you living to work? So I'll leave it there for the audience and let them, kind of go from there.
I love that. And I always end my podcast with one final question just to kind of leave everybody with a thought. And that question is, at the end of the day, what is one part of your character that you are most proud of and why?
Mine would probably be loyalty, because loyalty will open doors, and loyalty will show people who you truly are.
I love that. I love that. It's so important. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your time and sharing your story. with our listeners.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me, Sarah.
Absolutely. All right, friends. Thank you so much for joining us here on episode 4 of The Neutral Zone. And I want to thank Matthew Militich for joining us and for sharing his story and his heart today. One of the things that I wanted to kind of recap on what he talked about that I felt was really important was chasing your dreams and having the determination to go after what you want in life. I think a lot of times we can make excuses about we don't have the resources or the time to want to pursue the things that we feel like we might be called to do. And friends, if that is something that you feel like is a calling that the Lord has placed on your heart, a dream or a passion you have, then He's going to provide the tools and the pathways for you to do that. You just have to have the courage to take the first step. And once you take that first step, the pathway that the Lord has for you for that dream or that goal is going to be illuminated. And you'll see all kinds of doors open up for you. But the first thing you have to do is try. And I had a dream for the last few years of creating this podcast and being able to get things out that I felt were important and the connections that the Lord has drawn to me, being able to bring people on like Matt, who I would not have met otherwise had I not had the courage to put a joke on a board and hang it up at a game. And you know what? There's some people that see the jokes and pass on by, and that's fine. And the Lord is going to bring the connections to me that He would like me to have. And I'm thankful for those. So if you feel like the Lord is calling you to something, pray about it and have the courage and the strength to step out in faith. And the Lord will be there with you in that. Thank you once again to Matthew Militich for joining us today. And until next time, friends.